Welcome, everyone. It is awesome to be with you. This is an incredibly pertinent and powerful panel discussion we'll be having. And it's truly an honor for me to be in the position to moderate. Before we jump in with introductions for our three panelists, I wanted to invite Lisa. She is the president of the newly opened Longmont branch of High Country Bank, and they are the sponsors of this event. They made it possible. So I'm gonna front and center Lisa here so she can say a little bit about High Country Bank and their social mission. You're on.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate it. Like she said, we just opened this branch in November. High Country Bank has been around since 1886 in the Salida market. And so we're new to the Front Range and have been welcomed with open arms, which we've been really excited about. And our relationship with Hope is going to be an ongoing, long-lasting one, which we're proud of. So we're happy to sponsor this event today, and this topic is so important in business and in our everyday lives. So I know we're going to learn a lot from you three ladies today. So we're really excited. My team's going to be joining me in a minute just to listen in. So thank you all for letting me speak, and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're super grateful for you, Lisa. And if you haven't had a chance to stop in and you live in Longmont, stop in and say hi. They're right near Jefes. And everyone there is so friendly at High Country, and they'd love to say hello and talk to you about how they're here for the community. So I wanted to take just a minute. Everyone has received the bios of our three panelists. So you've gotten a chance to see the long view of their history, their devotion to community, to humanity, and the way their own personal lineage and lines of development have contributed. You know, they are people who can speak to our topic today, and they are also people who walk the topic. So let's start out with Tatiana. Tatiana, I'm going to pin you so you can share just a little bit about why you're a panelist and why you're here.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. It's a real honor to be in the company of Marta and Glenda and be in this conversation with all of you today. So I won't go into my professional bio, but I'll start by saying I am the daughter of Blas Roberto Hernandez and Clara Inés Hernandez Vaquero. I am first generation American. I'm actually the only American born person in my family. My father's lineage is Cuban, before that Canary Islander. My mother's lineage is Colombian and part indigenous. Before that, we were Basque. So we are a migratory family and a multinational family. So I mentioned I'm the only American in the family. I have cousins that are half Dutch, half German, that are Afro-Caribbean. We live all over the world. And so I come to this conversation with a perspective of someone who has always navigated boundaries, that's always kind of navigated identity in a way, because the identities of my own family were maybe unconventional or rather diverse. Let's use the word diverse. And so that's where I'm coming from, and it's just an honor to be in the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tatiana. Great to have you. Now I'm going to switch to Glenda. And Glenda, why are you a panelist? Besides answering being asked. Oh, you're muted.
All right. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. What an honor to be here with you guys, and what an honor to serve the community at large. It's an honor for me to be here today. I'm kind of filling in for Annette James, who is president of the NAACP Boulder County branch. But I am a 40-year resident of Longmont. I'm a small business owner of more than 35 years. I'm a community activist serving on many boards and commissions, and I will talk about that a little bit today for the city of Longmont as well as for Boulder County. I am currently on the Longmont Multicultural Action Committee, the founder of the Dr. Martin Luther King Legacy Celebration annually. I'm on the executive committee of the Boulder County branch of the NAACP, as well as a life member. I'm an associate minister, the second woman in 113 years at Second Baptist Church of Boulder, and director of family care there. And what brings me here is it's in my blood, it's in my bones. And like Tatiana, my family goes back to the early 1800s as enslaved African Americans. And so I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in the segregated Jim Crow South, which was a brutal and repressive era. Some of you know, you guys wouldn't remember that. Rooted in the growing refusal of the Southern states to grant enslaved Negroes who were freed after the Civil War equal rights with whites. We're still fighting those battles right now. People of color are still fighting that right now. And I'll stop at that point.
Thank you so much, Glenda. Great to have you with us. And now we have our third panelist, Marta. Marta, share with us what brings you to the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Kimberly. That's really how we got onto this particular panel. So I'm really interested in who else is participating. It makes it challenging to me to talk about equity, to address what DEI, what I would consider EDI, and the inclusion and those different topics, talking to a screen. And so I think why did I agree to join in this conversation? One, I'm super excited with these panelists, with these amazing women to share in conversation. And also I feel a real sense of personal responsibility to continue this work, and we'll get a chance to talk about what that work has looked like for all of us outside of the bullet points on bios, and hopefully interweave that and give some opportunity for folks to find out what their own work is going to be after participating, listening, and hearing this conversation. So that's my hope for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Marta. Fantastic. So it's always really helpful to break open the topic title, to let that be our entry point. And as I was meeting before this panel discussion with everyone, I was thinking we would each take a piece of the pie. However, in the conversation, I found that each of our panelists had a very succinct and penetrating way that they speak to the entire title. So I'm going to give a spot before we jump into the variety of complexity of issues and the underlying reasons we're still challenged in America around this topic, and then hopefully leading towards some solutions, some insight and inspiration. Before doing that, I want to open it up to each of our panelists to give their own definition of DEI or IDE or EDI, however, whatever order we want to put that in. And I chose the word imperative because imperative is an action call. It's an action statement. It's a call to wake up to something, and it is a call to set into motion action steps that are urgent, that are vital, that are essential. If you look at the root of the word, you find it comes from the Latin in parare, which means to make ready. So hopefully this conversation will make us more ready to engage, and Marta put so well, to be responsible in our community in ways that maybe we haven't in the past because we didn't understand the depth and the complicatedness of the issue. So take this as an imperative. I was even tempted to, this sounds like an altar call. When some of us were speaking, everyone was speaking so powerfully too. And I'm like, oh, we got to have an altar call here. So let me open it up so that each of our panelists can give their insight and their definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And let's start with Glenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim. So I serve as an historian as well. I've lived a long time. My folks have lived a long time. My grandparents lived almost to be 100, and they remember their parents and their grandparents who were enslaved people, by the way. So I want to go back a little bit, or I will define diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet I want to go back and say, we keep coming up with all these programs and all these initiatives and all these things that at the time sound good and they sound like they're going to fill the bill. So diversity, and this is not me, I have a tendency to be wordy, but I'm going to be very brief. Diversity is differences. Equity is equal access. Inclusion, we talked about this the other day, is belonging. And so before that time, I think back to the 60s. I was born in the late 40s. And so I think back with President Lyndon Johnson and the civil rights movement and the coming up of the Great Society was what he coined the phrase. We had the Educational Opportunity Program, or EOP. Everybody was talking about that. We had the CAP program, the Community Action Program, and I think Boulder County still has that. We had affirmative action programs. We had disparity studies, but I mean, they prove exactly what we knew all along, I think. We had poverty programs. We had the CETA program. And so all of these things have evolved, I believe, to make a difference, but I question it. So I don't know what differences they're all making with what we're living in, what we've experienced just last week, right here in Boulder, people that we knew from our church. The equal access, we still don't have it completely. And the inclusion, that's man's human nature, is that they want to, not they, we want to belong. We have that sense and that need of belonging. I'll stop there. I can't hear you.
Kimberly, you're muted.
Oh, okay. I thought it was me.
Marta, how would you speak to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I go the other direction. For me, equity is the beginning step. I think to me, it's a very, it's really simple to say we want diverse workforce. We want diverse classrooms. We want diverse. To me, that doesn't actually get us to the outcomes that we need. I think we need to really look at what does that system look like? Because if I bring a group of diverse students or I bring a group of diverse workforce and I don't have a system that is able to look at the inequities that exist, then folks aren't going to feel included. They won't be welcomed. And then we have a retention issue. And so that's kind of the way that I look at the equity, diversity, and inclusion. I feel like it's really addressing the full system in that picture and figuring out who's on board to change outcomes, because the reality is if folks in leadership don't want to have different outcomes or can't define what those different outcomes are, then don't tell me to bring a diverse candidate pool to you. Don't ask me to bring in diverse students. Don't ask me to bring in diverse board members, because we won't feel included and we probably won't stay. So hopefully that kind of gives a reasoning about what that is and gives some examples of, to me, what equity, diversity, inclusion looks like.
Thank you, Marta. And Tatiana.
Thanks, Kimberly. I borrow my definition from Arthur Chan, who said, diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, to Marta's point. And belonging is an outcome, to what Glenda mentioned earlier. We are a diverse society, fact. Do we have equitable opportunity? No, and that's a choice. Do people feel included in that process? How could they if the choice towards equity has not been made? Again, to Marta's point. And the sense of belonging is what we're all seeking. So that's how I define DEIB.
I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. So when we look at the issue at hand, there are a lot of ways that we can point even to our foundings as a country, as both um, ways that we're called to heal these wounds and ways we have become entrenched because of some of our underlying wounds and issues. I know that when I was in seminary, we studied the inaugural addresses, and you found this pervading theme in the inaugural addresses. This was a sociological study of religion. And you found this theme of us being the chosen people. And I think that's really in the ethos, right? The American dream, and so many people coming to America for freedom. And we've got this personality and this quality that we've self-defined ourselves as, that started out from this noble desire of a small group of people to have freedom. And we defined it within our Constitution. And I wanted to invite Glenda to speak a little bit to that, because you made a quote on our discussion about we hold these truths as self-evident. Where would you go with that? Let's break that open a little bit. You're still muted. I know, it's okay. We can catch each other.
Yes, I will very briefly run us through. I'll start with 1619, which not everyone, many people are disputing what happened back then. But in 1619, 20 Africans arrived on American soil against their will. We could call them enslaved, I guess, to provide free labor for white landowners. And then America's founding fathers, of course, got together, and many times over that period. And then they formed the Constitutional Convention to establish for us the United States of America. Of course, in 1776, July 4th is what some people say that date was. So the Declaration of Independence was then drafted, starting out by saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that are among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the first problem with that is we're arguing then and now over what it constitutes to be a man. All men are created equal. That's what the founding fathers said. And then the other reality for many of us, especially people of color, well, particularly me as an African American female, it's not my reality. I mean, in some parts, we're free, but we're certainly not equal. And so that is really kind of how we got here. And I saw you alluded to the quote that I made about Dr. Maya Angelou, who said, America will not be healed and whole until it begins to tell the truth about slavery, about how we enslave people, how we have this hierarchy of I'm higher than you and I'm better than you, and we're different. Yes, we're all different, but we all have value. we all have much the same value. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to jump to Tatiana on that because you followed up with understanding, even as your introduction, understanding in a bit more penetrating way what identity and boundaries mean. And, you know, just pointing to the historical event that Glenda pointed to about a certain people being brought to the country for a certain purpose that entrenched them into that identity.
Yeah.
Instead of them arriving on their own on a boat and seeking something. So how can you help us understand the effects of our ideas around boundaries and identities?
Well, if I can actually just pick up where Glenda might have left off in terms of the Constitution, we are one of 4 countries that codified race in its constitution. We are not in good company. The other 3 are Nazi Germany, who learned it from us, apartheid South Africa, that learned it from us, and Australia, that learned it from us. And so I just want to name that the original sin of this country has never been addressed, that we were the first to codify racial hierarchy in our constitution, and we have been fighting for that equality, fighting for the expansion of, fighting for our country to live its values, our country to hold true to its aspirational statements, which is what they were, because they weren't true at the time that they wrote them, and they're still not true. So I just want to name that the fight for civil rights has been the fight for America's integrity. And I know, so similar to Glenda, I'm a bit of a historian, because as the only American in my family, I had to understand this place and explain it to my cousins and my uncles, and you know, whenever we got together for dinners or Christmases, which was rare because again, we're multi-continental, they would ask me questions like, why do you guys do that? And I'm like, I don't know, let me figure it out. But my inquiry and my curiosity around that brought me to understand that we are a country still in the making. And we're not there yet.
Thank you. Thank you. And I bring Marta on with this. Marta, you understand that the issue still exists with your devotion when it comes to fair housing and housing. I mean, what's more powerful than having a home? You know, and in the entire American dream, it's like what? The freedom to own land, the idea that it means to be a success is to have a home. I mean, that I've traveled all around the world, and not everybody has that idea that to be a success is to own a home. When you see that we still have a lot of challenges in these arenas, how might you speak to how the issues are still existing in your particular career and path?
Sure. I think what we're talking about is the inequities in systems that still exist and are perpetrated right throughout every sector of Boulder County, our state, and really in this country. So just to be really clear about what we're saying, to specify that into the housing realm, I think the fact that we have fair housing rules and still need those are an indicator of the fact that things are still inequitable. What does that look like? It looks like an appraisal on a home right now when somebody needs to refinance their home, either to stay in their home and get their interest rate lowered, and literally their home is valued based on what their home quote unquote looks like. It's based on what the pictures on the walls, the color of skin that is shown in pictures on the walls in their home in the United States. Those are real-time studies. Those are real things that are happening right now in the US around our country that affect the value, that affect the way that people have access to capital, it creates these relationships. I think it was High Country that Lisa that was on earlier. I mean, those are relationships that are really, really critical, because in the United States, you have to have access to the financial system. whether it's through a credit system and credit folks who don't know, and it's around 60% of folks, North Americans, who've never left this country. So they may not know that FICO scores don't exist in the rest of the world. And so this credit system is very unique. And so for those of us who are still cash users, it's a very different system, right? And so breaking into that, that's part of my background is in banking and finance, in mortgage and real estate. And so to be able to understand the intricacies, working specifically with immigrant communities, undocumented communities, et cetera, there's inequities through that entire process. And it does, like you said, it does affect the ability for folks to, one, get a home, and also to retain their home.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, it's so easy. I hear in many circles that there's opportunity. We're the land of opportunity, and you have to make your opportunity. You know, that's out there almost like a guilt-laden phrase. It's like, if you can't work our system, then what's wrong with you? There's oftentimes this polarizing look at our country as a setup for freedom, for you can live your dream, you can have the career that you want, you can live your bliss, you can do it. And if you're not doing it, it's because you're just failing in some way. And it's really important for us to break open these issues and also give these very practical examples. It's not staying in the problem to point to these realities over and over again. I know when I left the monastery and I went to seminary, you know, as a woman, I graduated double distinction. I graduated top of my class. I aced all my comprehensives. And my offer on a starting salary in my late 30s, my offer, this is 20 years ago now, was $28,000. Starting salary, 20 years of experience, devotion all my life into the field. And the reasoning was because I was in a relationship. I wasn't married, I was in a relationship moving towards marriage, and pretty soon I wouldn't have to be the money provider. That was the reasoning for my offer. But there are even things happening right now that mislead us. Tatiana, I wanted to invite you to share what you did about vaccines and the reporting and the assisted living. This gives us a little bit more insight into the issue present day.
Well, can I pause for a second? And I really appreciated that you said that opening remark around our systems, right? And I just want to name that the challenge of all of this is that the our is rooted in white supremacy, right? The our systems were built in a white supremacist frame. So that's the challenge. And people make up those systems. So when we think about the work that needs to happen, it is both individual and systemic, because as individuals, we can affect systems. One of the things that came up, and I don't want to say this in any way to diminish the incredible work that our healthcare systems are doing or that our state is doing around vaccine equity. Folks are working really fast, really hard right now to get us out of an unprecedented situation. But, in conversations with the experts, we were being told, 90% of people 70 and over have been given an access to the vaccine. But when you drilled that down into demographic data, it was less than 5% of Latino elders that were given vaccine at that particular time. That information is quite a bit dated at this point, given the speed of change. And I said, well, sure, if the strategy to reach an elder population was entirely focused on assisted living facilities, we don't put our elders in assisted living facilities for either cultural or economic reasons. And so it makes perfect sense to me that you would miss that out. But if someone hadn't asked the question of where do elders live in other communities or in other cultural traditions, then they would be blind to the fact that not everybody puts elders in assisted living facilities, or that that's not the only way to reach an elder population. And so I use that as an example, but the the hour
Mhm.
really sat with me, right?
Thank you. Thank you. And Glenda, part of what you were pointing to was that we're still telling lies. We're still telling lies. And we do that, right? Cognitive dissonance and all sorts of mechanisms we have in our psychology to lie to ourselves, to make us feel like we're okay, right? We're okay. What are some of the lies we're still telling ourselves now, today?
Well, yes, we are still telling lies, and it goes back to the beginning of life for us, in the sense that we're not a part. I mean, we say that we're a part. This is the United States of America. When I grew up in the 40s, I grew up in the segregated Jim Crow South. Every morning, and when I say segregated, I went to all Black schools. We had all Black teachers, Blacks and whites, and it wasn't any other people of color. It was just that in the South at that time. We're not allowed to race mix, as they say. And so we went to that school, we got our education, but every morning we had to say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. This was drilled into us, our prayers, our song, and the pledge of allegiance to the flag before every athletic event, all of that. And so, and so now you get out into the world of work and you find out, this doesn't exactly apply to me. It kind of does if I'm a superhero, or if I'm a great athlete, if I'm, above. There's always that you're at the top of your game, or you don't quite measure up or qualify. So that's just one thing. One thing I want to do, if I can segue, and I want to give a couple of definitions. One to racism. The next one to systemic racism, which is what Tatiana and Marta was talking about. So racism is the conscious or unconscious belief in the superiority of one race over or against another. And it's manifested in the use of power or influence or recourses and even communication that seeks to reject or marginalize, meaning treat as insignificant or overlook, or even oppress others of other ethnicities. So this system that we're all talking about, this systemic racism, I know some people say systematic. No, it's systemic, because that racism is embedded from that time that I was telling you about in 1619 in the structures of every aspect of our society, whether economic, political, legal, medical, housing, employment, education, criminal justice, just to name a few. So in our whole living process, we have this systemic racism. And it operates, it's in the policies and procedures that we even set up to run our government. And so it's embedded in every structure of our society. And I'll give you a little example. The 13th Amendment was supposedly free Black men from whatever, but Black men were stopped on the side of the street, or if they walked the wrong way, or if they were on the wrong side of the street, or if they were just lollygagging or hanging out, they could be arrested. So this criminal justice system is poison. It's for the benefit of whoever runs those systems. It's certainly not for our benefit, because people of color represent over 50% of the residents, in those jails. I'll stop.
No, Glenda, can I pick up on that? Because if we're
Sure.
going to speak truth, let's speak truth. the policing system in America was established to capture slaves who had escaped.
And that policing is still happening today.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Marta, would you like to share anything from your Hispanic background and your experience? You definitely have, each one of you women are very self-made women, right? You've reached in to stand in your own truth and to stand for what you're passionate about and not pull away, but enter into. Would you like to share a little bit about some of your personal experience?
Yeah, I was trying to think if there was a question behind this, but yeah, I'll just go to that general. Two things. I don't necessarily consider myself self-made
Okay.
because I mean, I hear what you're saying, and so there's a yes, and I have a circle of comadres who are the ones who have picked up my kids and taken them to school when I made a decision to be on a board. I have folks who have stepped in and helped with different pieces in my own circle to allow me to work the 3 jobs that I needed to work as a single mother in Boulder County to be able to create a future for my kids and to build some type of stability for what to me felt like I would be able to, just keep moving forward. So I just want to acknowledge those people because without that circle, and everybody has their, whatever that looks like. And some folks have a real solid family. Some folks, we have the family that we've chosen and the friends that we connect with, or our circle, or our comadres, whoever that might be. But I just want to recognize all of those folks in this conversation, and also know that for me, it's been a conversation of the invitations that have appeared. I'm a yes person. I'll say yes, and we'll figure it out. And because back to that initial piece of my responsibility to use my experience to learn more, to keep getting into these different places that I believe will affect change. And I also believe that wherever I am at that certain time, whether it was a specific school building that I was giving instruction at, or a certain boardroom that I was facilitating conversations very similar to this years ago, or creating the form of the cafecito that is now used around Boulder County to bring, 20 years ago, to bring teachers who couldn't speak Spanish in a room together with their students' families, who were majority Spanish speaking families, to unite and to create communication and opportunities to understand the needs. And so in all those different places, I feel like I'll be where I'm needed, and I will take those experiences and support community members before anything else. And so, from just a personal experience, that kind of helps respond to the question that you're asking. But I feel like I'm hoping this conversation and some of the questions and folks that are out there online, et cetera, will bring in some of their questions about where I think you're headed here shortly is what's next, and what's my role, and what do I need to do, and how do I need to do that? Because we're in a time that conversations are so critical, and the action behind them, and I think maybe Tatiana had just mentioned, is where we all need to go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we'll be opening it up to questions. So as you're thinking of questions, as everyone's sharing, we do have one in the Q&A and a couple comments in the chat. Put them in either place and I'll be collecting them up and throwing them out to everyone. So yeah, thank you for sharing. I think it's important to stay very practical, get to the deeper. I'm so philosophical in that, and I think it's important to kind of make sure that our deeper insights and penetrations to the influences in the topic of what we're talking about also have a practical mirror to them, that we see exactly what we're talking about step by step, and how important it is to address the practical pieces of it. So thank you for sharing, Marta. And Tatiana was going to add a little bit more to what we were just talking about, race and mixing, rules on interracial marriage, and
Well, and thank you for the space to add to that, because as Glenda was sharing the experience of the segregated South, I was reminded of the history. I think it's so important that we talk about our origin stories, because we didn't get here by accident, right? When we design things, they have intended and unintended consequences. And so I mentioned earlier, my background is part of my family's from Colombia. And in the independence of Latin American countries, Simón Bolívar's vision was for a northern country of South America, what is now Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela, to be one country called New Granada. And when the leaders from those three countries got together and started thinking about their constitutions, thinking about what power structures might look like, the folks in Colombia were very clear that while they could not mandate interracial relationships, they were certainly going to encourage them culturally, because if we were going to become a people, we needed to merge as a people. Well, Venezuelans felt differently, Ecuadorians felt differently, and if you show up in modern day Ecuador and Venezuela and Colombia, you see three different looking people. There is a strong, predominantly white, wealthy, upper class in Venezuela, and a predominantly Afro-Caribbean, African Venezuelan community there. In Ecuador, same dynamic, but indigenous. And 80% of Colombians consider themselves mixed race. And so I name that to say that these origin stories matter, because what we are dealing with today are both the intended and unintended consequences of them.
Great, thank you, Tatiana. And just to keep you on for another moment, this also points to a phrase that you mentioned in our talk, binary opposition. And I think that can be really helpful, because there is an incredible amount of movement and progress that can happen when identity happens, right? When we get into a group that has a mission and an identity, we can be agents of change. So there's a goodness to identifying that we're for this mission and not for that mission. And at the same time, we have this paradoxical nature to that identity, where it also can create greater division. I mean, some of the greatest atrocities in our humanity have come about because a group has come together with an identity that formed an us and them that was destructive. I mean, you can point to that over and over and again, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's religion, whether it's ideology, whether it's national. So talk to us a little bit so we can understand that this is part of our nature, and how can we work with it? Binary opposition.
So folks on the call may have realized that I'm both a student of history, but also a student of sociocultural anthropology. I mean, I really wanted to understand who I was in the context of where I was. And I learned about this concept of binary opposition that exists in sociocultural anthropology, which goes back to our tribal roots, that tribes did not define who they were until they were encountered by an other. Until they were presented with something that was different from them, they did not coalesce in their own identity. And so that's hardwired to some extent in our nature as beings, but something we have to consciously, intentionally, perhaps even to discomfort, work against to some extent, to better understand, sit with curiosity, be in communion with one another, if we're going to get anywhere as a community, as a beloved community, as Glenda I think would say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for defining that. And so Glenda, when you're looking at this entire issue, what is some insight? You gave some wonderful thoughts about, okay, here's the conundrum we're in. What do we do now?
Well, so what I will do is, I think I shared with the group the other day. Um, we've got so many things. America is on trial here. We're looking at another trial, which I can't bear to watch, but America is on trial for, and we still haven't told the truth about it. But 40 years ago, my nephew, the oldest grandchild in my parents' line, was driving through the streets of Signal Hill, California, on his way to coach a Latino Little League baseball team. He was a senior running back at Long Beach State, football star. The cops didn't know that, but he was driving a brand new car that his parents bought him for getting a full scholarship. He was stopped for speeding, supposedly, doing 35 in a 25-mile speed zone. 2 hours later, he was murdered with the chokehold. This is the reason today in Los Angeles County, his life, and we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of his death. And my sisters, we had a family call last night, and they unveiled some incredible stuff because the city of Signal Hill is turning out basically to celebrate and remember the life of Ron Settles because he changed the face, his life changed the face of how this little town handled things. And so it speaks to several things. You know, I said the other day, John Lewis always said, say something and do something. Well, our kids, my son and daughter, all of the children of those of us remaining have formed the Ron Settles Memorial Foundation. That yesterday was the deadline, but it will offer scholarships in criminal justice, in law enforcement, or any other legal aspect of getting your law degree, both in Memphis, Tennessee, in Los Angeles, California, and in Atlanta, Georgia. So there was a trial. They lied and said that he committed suicide, but he didn't. So my sister, who was the only one of the 9 of us that had one child, that was him. She said she will go to her grave to free his name. He wasn't this monster or whatever they were saying. He was on drugs and all, even to the point of exhuming the body. I guess I'm saying in all this, sometimes you got to go the extra distance. She exhumed, had the body exhumed. Johnny Cochran represented the Settles family. Helen was our sister, and Ron was her only child. After the trial was over in 85, it took 5 years, 81, June 2nd, 81 to 85. And they changed that from suicide to death at the hands of another, but no one served any time for the crime. But the difference that Ron's life has made in the lives of other people, the city of Signal Hill would like to honor him on this was June 2nd, 1981. So come this June 7th, that foundation, our kids, some of whom didn't even know him because they were young people. But anyhow, we will be honoring his life, paying it forward, and making our pain pay, giving purpose to our pain. These are just some of the things that I know that people can do. Just, I mean, it's a tremendous price to pay, but I don't know, am I even on the subject or not? It was a great loss, but it's going to be a great investment paying it forward. And I thank God for our children who saw, they said, no, this wasn't him at all. This wasn't what he represented. So because of his life, the chokehold in Los Angeles County has been banned. It's against the law for an officer to use the chokehold on any individual. So that's just one thing. I have lots of other things when we get to that I can share that we can do.
Great, great. We'll circle back to you, Glenda. I know you do have so much to share. Everyone does. And, you know, it brings up a really important point, is that we are all part of the human community. So I think one of the things that I feel impelled with is that there is no issue that I'm exempt from, because it's part of my human community. And in that, there is a need to always go into what's uncomfortable, to always take that extra step, to always inquire more, to always dismantle where I stop short of the truth, to always look at where my fear leads me to limit my perspective and view, to continue along the inner work of being healed of the fears that lead to my own divisiveness, so that I can answer the call to be a worthy and fully participating human in my community. And with that, while that can seem very all-encompassing, very extreme, it's also very gentle, because in it dissolves the stances. It gives opportunity for there to be a greater intimacy with the human I'm standing next to in the supermarket, with the way I may read a newspaper article, with where a conversation may go with a human being. And while I don't see that I'm quite as skilled as the three women here in the way you're navigating your roles in the local community, there are small ways like that. I consider myself part of the small leaven in the community, by shifting my perspective to always be all-encompassing like that. And while that's uncomfortable, it's imperative. It's imperative. And Marta, you spoke about learning to hear as one of the important ways that we can be a part of the solution. Can you speak more to that?
I don't remember exactly what that conversation was. And partly because I think I want to respond to what you were just saying.
Oh, please go ahead.
And
Go ahead.
because this conversation around EDI, it is imperative. I completely agree. And I also want to just respond that most white people don't have to, as you just talked about, navigate the day-to-day, don't have to navigate the systems that we're talking about, because most white people haven't had to reflect yet, or don't know how to, or haven't learned to even identify their own whiteness and what that really means for them in a day-to-day, literally just a day. And so I just want to say that, because being part of this panel and part of this conversation, and not just this one, as much as these conversations, requires the emotional labor of people of color. And I think that's one of the pieces that we really need to figure out. How can we use these conversations for white people to really have an opportunity to address their whiteness along with that experience? When you say, you know, it all encompassing, and yet not everybody is included in the same conversations, or to be able to come together as an encompassed conversation, I guess is what I'm thinking. So I think that's where I'm at, right? Just in that, just as a call out and a question, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit more. But I feel like that's one of the pieces that hasn't been said yet.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it needs to be said. And Tatiana, how would you like to add to that? You also said some compelling things as well around where our call lay, around the fear and the vulnerability.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so this just came to me. We experienced something horrific last week. And for many people, the reaction was external, right? Like, how do I help? Where do I go? Da-da-da. And without the internal processing of what we experienced, right? It was immediately kind of like, what's next? Some might call that a characteristic of whiteness, to find solution. And so I would say equity work is internal work first and never ending, right? Or you know, always digging deeper. And it's really relational work, in understanding one's relationship both within society, to each other, to systems, and then working on those systems, because those systems are built by people. But I just fear that sometimes we jump to solution too quickly without doing the internal work first. And that's the hard part, because we have to be vulnerable to be able to do that internal work. We have to acknowledge that maybe we were wrong. I mean, you know, I grew up in a city that was 80% Latino. I had a huge culture shock when I went to college and realized there were a lot of white people in America. I just didn't know them. And so that was a process. And then also recognizing my own white privilege because of the color of my skin, despite my ethnic heritage that is Latino. And how do we unpack that even within the Latino community? There is a ton of colorism. And I would even call it, you know, it's the vestige of colonialism for us, which lands differently in an American context, but is still really critical in the conversation, particularly as Latinos become, you know, a larger percentage of our community. Because if we don't get it right, then we're going to keep getting it wrong, right? As a society. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's just kind of what I sat with what, you know, and hearing with what these ladies shared.
No, it speaks to it. It speaks to it. And I think it's important, you know, with these, how you're reflecting on where the nature of the conversation is going. It's important, I think, in all of it, for all of us in attendance here, that to shift perspective makes us part of the solution. If we have one new thought that changes an entrenched way we've operated up to this moment, we have become a part of the solution. And I think, Tatiana, I liked what you said in the conversation we had on Monday, is it is the path. This is the path. And the inner and the outer are meant to be one and the same, right? And as we grow in authenticity, with, I think humanity is still very young in its path of becoming authentic. I think maybe 3 years old. We're like 3-year-olds a little bit, but on that path, once the inner and the outer meet, then we will become whole as a community. So perspective changing for me is a really big one. I've had my entire life change when I've had a different perspective come about. When something has happened, a lot of times it's an outside event, right, that happens that shakes us up in a certain way. Sometimes an internal response that creates suffering, that until it's met, addressed, embraced, seen for what it is, but it always leads to a different way of looking at things. And so we are at 1 o'clock already, and I wanted to open up to a couple of these questions. And panelists, any of you can jump on. You can all three be off mute if you want, and you don't have to raise your hand to go first. Then we can all contribute to these answers. So the first question was, what steps can we as individuals work towards DEIB and lessen racism in things like the housing, police, etc.? That's the first question, which is a doozy, isn't it? Okay, who wants to speak first? Marta?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that question. And I think, you know, one of the things that we had talked about, Kimberly, when we met, is for me right now, virtually, to not know who's participating and who the audience is makes it really tricky to respond to what steps the virtual world can do in terms of action. I think it's a request for some action items. And I say it makes it difficult because everybody's in these different places of the spectrum. For some people, this might be their first conversation and they're just now hearing there might be a difference between DEI and EDI. And there's other people that just finished their first book that they saw about, last summer. And there's other folks who've been doing this type of work but are challenged by their own identity crisis and trying to navigate their own personal piece. I mean, the spectrum is so wide. So I think to me, the very basic and the very initial piece is for folks to really look at where they're at and what work they're willing to do and how they're willing to do that work. And it might be, we might have participants online who are just considering the circle of folks they're going to play golf with in the next few weeks, and who is that group and what are those conversations and how can they bring this type of a conversation forward. Somebody in this conversation might be the owner of a company here in Boulder County that could really look at their workforce and determine, do they have a diverse workforce? More importantly, do they have folks in leadership that have actual change making policy, as Glenda talked about, policy power to really make change to, as you're asking Quinn, to lessen racism in the policies that address all these different items. So it's hard to, hopefully those are a couple of different ideas to think about where you're at and what could be addressed. But without knowing who all is out there, it's a little tough to know where you're at. So that's a broad, but Tatiana, if you want to jump in.
I think that's exactly, a good, those are fantastic suggestions, Marta. I think for me, it's learning how to ask questions to understand the problem, right? So we say things like, well, there is systemic racism in X system. Pick a system, any system, there's lots of it. How? Where? In what ways? I think Glenda gave some great examples, or Marta, forgive me, it might have been you, around like credit and people's accessibility to credit, and that system being a very American system, or even the way loans are given. So there's when you start to tease at the systems and understanding the ways in which they are inequitable, then you've got targets you can actually work with, right? And it's been my experience, especially in our community, that people in those systems are really open to hearing how they can do better. People in those systems are not defensive, maybe for a second, but are not entrenched in their defensiveness, where they are not open to change. And so I think for folks that are interested in changing systems, learn the system first, and then learn who the decision makers are within that system, and then seek to influence those decision makers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Glenda, did you want to add anything to that?
Bet your bottom dollar I do.
Hold on, let me get that bottom dollar out.
So one thing I want to say, and to Marta's point, we don't know who is out there, but one thing I want to say in terms of work, or a CEO or a person who's a manager or what have you, we definitely, it has to start. That change that we're talking about, that systemic change, has to start from the top down. What we usually do is we just usually form these committees and get the worker bees to come up with all these plans and processes and go to implement them, and you get to the top and the boss is like, I don't want to do that. And so that it has to start from the top down. as far as working people, I can just share from my own experiences how these 40 years have kept me involved in the community is so important. Talk about that belonging. That's what makes you belong to the community, is that you invest your time, your talent, and your treasure in it. And so I just wanted to throw out a few things. We can volunteer at whatever level we want to. We can start almost anywhere. We've got city council every Tuesday evening, city council Boulder, city council Longmont. We've got boards and commissions in both Longmont and Boulder and the county that are begging for people to get involved in MARTA housing and all of those things, housing and human services. There just are innumerable. I served for 30 years on the Family Self-Sufficiency Board of Boulder County. Started out being the Project Self-Sufficiency Board. I have many successful people that I mentored that went on to get their college degrees, and some of them have their their masters at least now. And then, so just volunteering at any level. I had a group of students volunteer in the NAACP to write the Get Out to Vote campaign. They wrote hundreds of cards, kids from Fairview High School, and they were delighted to do it. I mean, there is so much. There's the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Boulder County that's doing incredible work. You can get involved there. We have the NAACP Boulder County branch, which of course is a national branch since 1909, that has been making a difference. Actually, it's their work. That's why we're all sitting here now. The civil rights movement started in the basement of a little Black church in Montgomery, Alabama, when a little 42-year-old lady said, "I'm not giving up my seat." And a 26-year-old man said, "Well, I don't know. I came here to take over Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to be the preacher, but now y'all want me to lead this movement by the name of Martin Luther King." So it's so much that people can do. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know all three of you. And by the way, as a follow-up to this panel, if anybody wants to be personally connected with any of our panelists, you can email me, Kimberly@hopeforlongmont.org, if you have further questions, comments, inquiries, and I will pass that on. They're easily found. All three of these women are prominent in our community as well, so you can reach out directly to. And feel free, panelists, to put your email in the chat box. So
I'm going to jump in really quick, Kimberly.
Yes,
just to add on
absolutely.
to what Glenda just said, I'd
Yes.
be remiss if I didn't say that community folks who are looking for a way to make change need to be invited to run for office. And so the folks that are in those circles that are kind of looking at what is my role and what can I do? And I've always told folks, so I'm a single mom, I've got 2 boys, I'm an immigrant to this country, my kids are sons of immigrants. And I've told people in power, like, don't give my son, don't give my kiddo, even when I was a classroom teacher, don't give my students a backpack full of pins. I'll make that happen. I'll make sure that they're prepared to go to school because education is their only ticket out. That's just my personal belief. And take them to your home where you've got a dinner table that, as your CEO of a company, that can create conversations that otherwise they may not be privy to. And I can say that from my own personal experience, and I can also say that from working with different buildings in classrooms around Boulder County, that your zip code really does matter. It unfortunately is a significant definition of your outcomes, even in Boulder County. And we need to raise up folks from community with these experiences to run for office and to lead. And so I just want to encourage, if you're having those conversations, like who in your office, who in your circle, who on boards and commissions can we lift up, and who's willing to take their power and instead use that energy to mentor somebody from our community. When we talk about equity and diversity, inclusion, that's part of it. So that would just be kind of an add-on to Glenda's comments about where else we can put our energy. Thanks, Kimberly.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to read this next comment question. It's a good one. It's one I know I sit with quite a bit. I'm wondering how the panelists think America could include the worldviews of people that may not be compatible with capitalism. For example, many indigenous communities for whom the concept of private property, which is important in Colorado, is at odds with the feeling that the land is sacred and doesn't belong to any one of us. And I think that's a great question. I will give just a mini response because our work at Hope, working with individuals who are unhoused for a variety of reasons, oftentimes it's because they really are not enculturated to the way our capitalistic society works. There's something that doesn't work there. They haven't had the support systems for it. They haven't been taught it in a way that that's the path that they have taken. And their path to self-sufficiency is not going to be the American capitalistic structure. That's not the way they're going to operate their lives. We find alternative ways to offer them the support system so they can discover their self-sufficiency in our country. So how might the three of you speak to that? That's a really great one, right? It butts against those ideologies of free, the land of the free.
I want to respond just because it's a tough question for me. I feel like there's so much in there. And even the earlier conversation about land of the free, like that's uncomfortable for me because that hasn't been the way that I've walked through my life. I haven't felt that, and it's come in different ways of, a white student at CU Boulder in my face, spitting in my face, screaming and yelling at me to go back to Mexico. It's looked like 2017, January 2017, that followed months and months of fear for a lot of people in this country, and so many other different examples. And so so when you connect that question, Kimberly, to the previous conversation of free, those are some of the pieces that were coming up for me. And I think that, so I'm having a hard time just responding to everything that's in that question, but I just want to note that for me, one of the pieces in my new role, looking at land use specifically in Boulder County, is a really big learning for me to understand what's already been discussed today. Is how are these policies formed? How do we make decisions? And I'm asking some of those questions right now about when we talk about historic preservation. Who are we preserving? What history are we preserving? What does land repatriation look like for us in Boulder County? An acknowledgement for me doesn't feel like it's enough. It feels like it's acknowledging that white supremacy is still the host of our systems. And so that's just my personal feeling. And so I appreciate the conversation or the question from the sense of it's something that I'm working through right now in my own role and asking some of those questions to figure out how we can address that. I don't know that exactly answered the question, but I wanted to at least respond.
No, thank you. Very good. Very good. Thank you.
It's a struggle for me as well. And so I don't even have an answer. And the reason is because I've been in a lawsuit in the last 3 or 4 years because this group of lawyers don't feel that I should own what I own. So they've been after it. They've tried in every way they could to take it. And it's still kind of circulating. It says it's finished right now, but I've been there 3 different times thinking that it was over. Something in me says it's still not over. It's like, you don't deserve to have that. You don't deserve to have this. It's a wonderful piece of property. I thank God that I worked my tail off for the last 40 years for it. And so who are you to say that you want to take it? So we'll see where that goes. It's my own personal fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenda. You know, many people don't even realize that. I used to be Catholic. I think I still feel very informed by the mystical components that were very liberating for me. But the doctrine of discovery was put forth by a church institution, a European church, and it still has implications today in our country, upon our land, with our people, with the people we joined here that are Native Americans. So land ownership, who belongs to the land, Tatiana, I'd like to invite you to come back on, because you said you were giving a nice juxtaposition about who belongs to who, community belongs to, who belongs to community. And so what would you like to add to this conversation?
Well, I think on the, thank you for that. I think on this question of, that was posed to us, inclusion doesn't come with an asterisk, right? Like inclusion doesn't come with, as long as there are people who agree with us. On the contrary, if we're truly an inclusive, if we're truly trying to build an inclusive culture, a perspective that might be anti-capitalistic should also be included, right? That's not, so I would just say that aspect to it. And in reference to Native American rights, and again, the founding of our nation as a theft, these are things we have to grapple with as multiple thefts, right? Multiple thefts of land and people. Who are we really? And start from there. Who are we? Who do we belong to? Who belongs to us? And what does it mean to belong? What does it mean to be responsible for? And I know that's very esoteric, but these are the questions that we stumbled through or ignored actively in our origins and are now grappling with the consequences of as a people. And so I think we can't ignore those questions anymore.
Right. And I love the way you questions was one of your solutions. There's a great author, Janet O'Connor, who teaches soul writing. And she says, answers close us, questions open us. If we're willing to ask those questions, we lay ourselves open to hear the answer. And sometimes when we're asking these questions, they can be so scary because like, oh my gosh, what will happen if I don't like that answer? Like, you know, if my whole belonging is based on theft and oppression, what then? What do I do? Well, what we do is we go through the death that incurs. We step into the truth around that. And I'm not afraid of that word lie. So Glenda, when you use that word lie, I like it because there are ways that we massage the truth to ourselves so that we can remain comfortable. Well, I'll ask the question so long as it's not going to affect me too deeply. But we find when we ask these questions, we can't not be changed by the answers that come about. So I see you off mute, Glenda. I'm going to pin you up for a... Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. I'm sorry. Were you asking me to comment?
Oh, you went off mute? So I thought you went off mute, so I was inviting you into the into the trajectory. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. The other question we've got is racial makeup of Hope clients consistent with the idea that there is race-based inequity in Longmont, Boulder County. You know, Hope is here to serve everyone that is unhoused. That's 100%. We're there 100% for every person that's unhoused. Largely, Boulder County is a demographic that's white male unhoused. So our demographic doesn't boast a wide spectrum of ethnic background, of gender difference. We We do have individuals that come to us and we serve everyone. So our one defining quality is that we help the unhoused become self-sufficient. If you were to look at our stats, you're going to find that the majority fall within what is not diverse, just because of the makeup of Boulder County. So I don't know if that helps answer that question. We do have a very vibrant street outreach program. And so that is tallied into the people that we serve in a different way, because going out onto the streets, you encounter people of all different backgrounds. And there are many people who choose not to avail themselves of the resources right around them, partly because of trust, partly because the structure is asking something of them that they don't believe in or are unwilling to comply with. And so our way of broadening our demographic is to just go right out onto the streets. You know, I took a group of people when I was in Florida to visit Okeechobee, where there are a lot of tomato plantations. And, you know, in that area, you have a lot of immigrants, and it's terrible. The treatment and the pay are terrible. And you have largely Hispanic culture, immigrants there. And when largely the men came over to make money for their families to send back to the countries that they were from, whenever, though, largely like 80 to 90% of the individuals that were part of that community of immigrant workers, when they did open themselves up to support systems that were supposedly there for them, very often they got burned. And so we were going in kind of covert to help out, because these individuals were living 10 people in a one-room mobile, like little trailer. And they were also taken advantage of by way of the way they were offered food and drink when they would just get their money. And there was a lot of manipulation that was happening in the system there. But by and large, when we were talking to the Hispanic community there, they did not trust anything of the systems around them. So we need to build trust in our communities that our systems are there for them and are going to meet them where they're at. So that's kind of a less direct answer to your question there. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Can I just note something, Kimberly? And so I'm originally from Florida, and Okeechobee. When you said Okeechobee, I smiled because it reminded me of home. But even the terminology that we use and have used as code switching terminology. So in America, Latinos for many years converged on the term Hispanic as a way of describing themselves and as a way of connecting their origin to a European root in Spain. There are many Latinos who are not Hispanic.
Right.
They're indigenous, they're Black, which is why the term has evolved to Latino to describe more of the geography, right? To be a factually based rather than this proximity to whiteness term that you could argue Hispanic is. And so I just want to name that for people and how it evolves. I think there was not malintent, I think, in both the origin of that term or its usage for many years. It was a way of survival and a way of accessing power for Latinos for decades by recognizing, hey, if we talk about how we're actually connected to Spain, which is just south of France, so we're just like you, that it was a code switch. So I just want to name that for people in case they're not familiar with some of the nuance of that language.
Thank you. And is there any place that any of you could suggest where we can learn that kind of terminology? We can become a little bit more intimate. I know for my background, since, you know, I'm largely white, I have Native American, but I'm largely European. I'm always trying to find what's the most respectful way to to recognize ethnicity. What really celebrates the person or the community before me? And
I think that's one where it's really interesting, because today you will find both terms used within the culture, within the ethnicity, and it's telling who uses which term in terms of it's just I find it telling. So I will say Hispanic is very used in South Florida. Latino is very used on the West Coast and in the Southwest. Chicano is also another term that I think is much more specific. But how and who uses those different terms are ultimately about, obviously they're terms of identity, but they're also this code switch and relationship to whiteness. So I just wanted to kind of tease that out a little bit for us, because this is going back to what I said earlier, like as Latinos, we've got work to do too.
thank you. Thank you. So from the attendees, does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I think Glenda wanted to say something.
Yes, Glenda.
I was just gonna kind of lay it down. From my era, we were colored, Negro, Afro-American, Black, African, and now we're African-American. I don't know that we've arrived or not. I think it's more important that we really invest in knowing who we are. And this is a universal problem. I think we're where we are because people don't know who they are.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Glenda. Great. Well, we're coming, if there aren't any other questions, we're coming to the end of our time. I'd like to give a little space for our panelists to offer any closing remarks, anything you felt that we didn't address or cover or lay out there. You know, I'd like to put a challenge out to the attendees to make it a goal in the next 7 days to strike up a conversation about this panel, about what was covered, about a point that hit you or a point that put a question out there. Not a conversation where you have to have the answers, but a conversation that moves to a new set of questions. That can be a really powerful step. Marta, did you want to?
I was just gonna say, I like that. And the question around identity and what when I was finishing my grad program, that was one of the questions of, it's again, master's in secondary education. And as most people probably know, the majority of Colorado teachers are white women. And so, my whole cohort finally just said, what are we supposed to call you? And so I would just, in that challenge, just a friendly reminder that question of how you're going to have those conversations and that work you're going to do. The invite is to do that work as white community members first, versus calling your friend of color or the person that's of color and asking them to do that work for you. And I just feel like that's important, because there's a lot of these questions that we can be learners and life learners. And I had a lot of thoughts in regards to the identity. I'm also an ethnic studies undergraduate. So there's a lot there. And again, there's a conversation around whiteness and what white privilege means, and when it's appropriate to tell people that you've got white privilege, and what that message sends when you come to me in a meeting and say, I want to lay down my white privilege, because it's also you reclaiming your power and making sure that everybody that's not white is clear that you are the power structure. So how do we, so there's a lot that folks can work around, and so I just want to make sure that that's out there, and just gets kind of part of the conversation and thought process, because I love the challenge, Kimberly.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is Glenda, and I just want to kind of close by saying I'm also in addition to the things that I do, a storyteller. And I like to use my stories to challenge the human spirit and encourage the heart. Because I think we are more alike human beings than we are different. And if we learn to use our differences to make a difference, I think the world would be a better place.
Thank you. Thank you. Use our differences to make a difference. Yeah, powerful. Tatiana.
I don't know that I can add anything more eloquent than what Glenda and Marta just shared, but I would just, encourage people to, it's going to take time. These are hundreds of years, if not, no, thousands of years of institution building that we're trying to unravel. And so the urgency is felt because I think many of us feel that sense of urgency. Many of us feel that sense of urgency, and this is generational work. And so I just want to, echo, Glenda, your friend Martin Luther King, and say, like, the work does not end in one generation. Like the arc of justice continues to move. And so, for example, I don't expect this to be solved in my lifetime. But every step we take is an important step forward.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we're getting lots of thank yous. It's an honor to me as well to be with the three of you, to sit at table with you and learn with you and learn from you. And I really think we can end on that note. It's very rich. And even just bringing in, Tatiana, what you said in our discussion, our Constitution says, we the people, right? So we could end on that note. It's we the people. We're sitting here. We are the people. And with that, we can make the difference. Anybody else, any last words? Otherwise, we will sign off. There will be a recording of this. It will be on the Hope YouTube channel, and it will go out in our newsletter. If you're on this webinar and are not part of our newsletter, join it. I try to really do a lot of community spotlights, to have great success stories and pictures and reasons that are worthy of a newsletter and your time. We're all online a lot, and if we're going to be online, it might as well be worth our time.
Just a thank you to Kimberly and everyone for joining us today. Kimberly, for bringing us together. Thank you.
Yes, thank
Thank you,
you.
Judy.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Amen. Blessings to all of you.
Thank you.